This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/Mapper Forward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and I am joined by Ahmad Aleidan. Welcome back to another episode, Ahmad.
Thank you for having me again. Looking forward for the next episodes as well.
We are talking about specialty tea in this series, which is in 5 years of having this podcast, we have never talked about tea. So the thing that I wanted to focus on in this episode is, where does tea come from and what are the different kinds of tea that there is?
Okay, well, tea has started off with China. It has been romanticized on how the origin was actually, let's say, founded by mistake or by chance or by a mythical creature or what have you.
Unicorns and dragons?
It's actually been there for over 4,000 years.
Wow.
So for us to find the true story behind it, it's kind of a challenge, especially that it is found in a very, very romanticized, let's say, culture, where things are, as you said, there are dragons, there are mythical creatures, there are emperors, there are warriors, there are history that we tend to find it very hard to have the root for it. But there are things that are, there are things that have proven the lineage of it, of the history of it, of having tea there. There are contracts between servant and master, showing that part of the responsibilities of that servant is to buy and prepare tea.
Wow.
So that was a thing that would give us a grasp of time, let's say. And tea itself have not developed a standard of preparation or the way that we do it today and the way that we serve it today in some of the cultures in Asia and part of the world. And let's say for the last maybe it's only been proven to have a standard since a person that came into this community is a person called Lu Yao, which is a nomad artist philosopher who came up and said this is how the standard would be. This is called the guidebook of having tea or creating tea, from cultivating tea to picking on the way to serving tea. So etiquette started from that point forward. It has so many things. When we say that if you're going to find this where the ground zero, say where everything started, has to be China, and it's moved there all the way to Turkey, to Brazil, to Hawaii, some parts of the United States as well.
Wow.
And it's grown in production, and as it grew, it developed its own culture. That's why you find every part of this world will be having its own tea culture and its own reflection of tea and its own method of how to consume tea. There are so many standards in creating tea. They all, as we say, come from, we can have, let's say we have 6 major types of tea. We have the black, the red, the oolongs, the greens, the yellows, and the whites. This is being very high level. Each one of them is a world by itself.
Wow.
But we can say that there are standards today that would fit mostly on the red tea that we call black, because there's a huge. Let's put a differentiation point here. Whatever we say black tea here, and as foreigners out of the Chinese, let's say Far East Asia, would not entirely consider to be black tea to Chinese.
Okay.
So
I'm confused. How
yes.
come? Tell me more.
Because what we have when we consume as black tea is considered to be Hong Cha in Chinese. Hong Cha meaning red tea. And whatever they drink as black tea is either post-fermented or non-fermented black tea, Hei Cha. which is something that maybe if the person who just got into tea would understand something, there's a tea called pu'er tea,
Yep.
which is a post-fermented tea. And that's actually one of the varieties of black tea, where we can have our Ceylon tea and Indian tea and the um, other parts of the word tea would be red tea. However, the confusion was there, and since the Chinese this is a hypothesis that I believe and truly believe in, that since the Chinese are industrial people,
Hmm.
they would not try to much correct you as much as sell you the thing that you desire.
Oh, so it's a cultural, um, yeah, it's a cultural etiquette.
Yes. So what they do is what we have and consume of black tea is actually considered to be red tea, and it has so many different
Wow.
varieties of it. And whatever comes to black tea, it comes in different categories. Standardizing the point or the element that standardizes tea and differentiates the types of tea would be the oxidation levels.
Right.
So lightly oxidized tea would be fitting more to white and greens. And the more oxidized tea gets, the more it shifts to different parameters. However, there are some oolongs. When we go to white tea, we have a specific type of specific level of oxidation. Green tea, we believe that we don't have any oxidation. So basically, once we start to pick up the tea leaves, start the picking process, and take it to the production of tea, kickstart the production of tea, the moment that the tea leaves are, say, applicable, so it's going to be a very rapid time or a short time between picking and shaping and starting creating the tea itself. They go through a process they called the killing process. The killing process is a process of introducing heat to the leaves to stop an enzyme from helping oxidizing the tea leaves. That's why the green
Oh.
leaves maintain the color green into them. Um, and what we believe that white tea and green tea are more of live tea because we somehow dormanted the process of browning the leaves itself, and
Can I
that's
ask, is that
is
done chemically or is that a
sure.
chemical or physical process?
It's actually a physical process. You have to
Okay.
get the tea through impacting either using a wok, using a steam in a specific temperature, or tumble roasters. That's similar
Wow.
to what the ones they use for tea or coffee, and that would impact the enzymes inside those tea leaves that would stop the enzyme from browning those leaves. So when you see a red cup of tea, you would think that these tea have gone through a lot of heat elements and went through a lot of
Yeah.
roasting and went on. Well, that's not entirely true. It's been left and kept there for a certain time for the tea leaves to brown up.
And do they roll something over the top of them to start the enzymatic process?
Uh, it depends. It depends where you are in the world, the way you produce your tea. If we go through the standards of production,
Yep.
we do have Chinese, English, Orthodox, and we have the non-Orthodox ways.
Okay.
So the Orthodox way would be focusing more or less on having stages that have the tea go through and mostly use hand like human intervention or maybe use machinery that will mimic the human intervention to
Hmm.
creating the tea itself, and we have the non-orthodox where they just plainly, which is what we get mostly from their commodity tea, is getting the tea dumped into machines, which would reduce the time, reduce the labor, and get the tea out to the market as fast as possible. But generally, in a general sense, one type of tree, one type of cultivar can produce all five teas or six teas. It's just that where you are in the world, the type of soil, the type of temperature, the climate, the terroir, what we say that is a similar terminology that we'd be using in tea and wine culture,
Hmm.
and I think also applies in coffee as well,
Hmm.
is that it's focusing more on the ecological and human intervention or human involvement surrounding the tea farm or tea garden. And that point, that they found that specific parts of the world would be novice and let's say in creating something and an expert in creating something else. Chinese do have an understanding from an industrial point of view. Again, this is my hypothesis, and this is from whatever I've learned and got myself exposed to, is that a region as big of, let's assume, because I'm here in Istanbul today, uh, in a 60-mile radius, they will be all producing a certain type of tea.
A certain
So
type of varietal of tea.
yes, so they will be having, you'll be having a 60-mile radius area,
Yeah.
and maybe about 200 or 2,000 meters high, and they'll all produce a single type of white tea.
Wow.
So they will stop producing the others because they think that this area, this soil, and this climate would produce excellent, let's say, Yanzhen Baihao, which is the silver needle varietal of white tea, and they will be focusing on that only. So you'll be having areas well known like Anhui, China, that will be focusing only in white tea and the varietals of the same tree itself. So
So they won't turn
it's
that
more
into
of an
black
industrial
tea?
approach.
Oh, okay.
They will not focus on black tea at all. They would even maybe fail in producing black tea because it's an
Wow.
inherited process of creating one single type of tea and compete to be the best in that area.
So this sounds as though it's their how do you say, their aspiration to aim towards specialty levels of producing that kind of tea.
Actually, no. Actually, it's just that these are the, let's say, methods, culture, and an environment that we're not exposed to. And
Yeah, wow.
this is how big companies in the business do not want you to venture in.
Oh, so they get very good at it and you can't compete with them.
I mean, you can get whatever considered commodity standard in China and in Taiwan that
Yeah.
would surpass anything you would find anywhere in any supermarket or hypermarket next to you. And that's considered something cheap for you to consume, like where it comes from.
Wow.
So this is how mega companies. I'm not fond of making names or giving out names, but this is what Brook Bond and Lipton won't like you to venture in.
Right. So it's a globalization of tea.
It is a globalization of tea. That's why when you come and believe and expose yourself to something that you buy in a few dollars, you buy a whole pack of, let's say, of 23 or 300 and something grams, or like a quarter of a kilo, so 250 grams of tea, and you pay dollars of it. And
Yeah.
you come to a specific tea place or tea parlor or tea shop or tea house, and you start to find that you're going to buy something of maybe $50 or maybe $70 of a few grams of tea,
Oh,
you'd
yeah.
be somehow offended. So I can understand that, and that comes in from the lack of exposure, lack of understanding of how tea is. I
Right.
get people at every single place, including that when I was starting to introduce tea, introduce how to produce, to create the cup of tea, sitting down with Sarah and the team, and you'll be having a sit down with 10 people and even more, and nobody would think about having sugar involved
Yep.
or asking for a spoon to use to stir some sugar in. And the quality, and I've been getting questions coming in, this is not artificially sweetened, or it's not packed with a sweetener, or why is it a lighter shade of whatever you're accustomed to, and where it looks light, however, it presents a heavy body, which
Yeah.
is a surprise to them. They're used to having red colored, crimson colored, full body tea, and whenever they see light shaded tea, they assume that they need to wait on it.
And
And
keep
the
letting it
moment they
brew
start
so it'll get
sipping
darker.
them, yes,
Right.
and that's one of those things I enjoy. Actually, every time I go and start say a workshop or I introduce some tea for a menu somewhere developed in a cafe or something, I have a camera station somewhere and I would do the first impressions. So I would show it to them again and see how they're impressed with it. And the moment they pass the impression phase, they feel disappointed that they were not exposed to such wonderful teas before getting involved with us and the intention of improving their business.
Yeah,
So
wow.
mega businesses focuses on getting their products rolled out in the specific number and the specific price that they're happy with, um, cutting down as much labor as possible, cutting down the process, the production process as possible, just to get things out in the market and continue having people happy with whatever they're consuming today, not giving them the opportunity to venture out and explore different things. And the moment they see the cost related to the hours, the number of people, the quality of people, and the effort to produce. I mean, I'm not sure if you are well aware of this. 1/6 of a kilo of picked tea is actually tea ready to consume. So we lose a lot of the actual picking weight in the process.
In the drying process?
Yes, you pick up 1/6 of whatever you collected in the morning,
Wow.
and that's
There's
what's
so
considered to
many
be tea.
similarities between tea and coffee, even from that perspective. When I'm working with clients to account for how much they're going to end up with from a roasted coffee perspective, we start with the weight of the green tea. They lose about 13% in the roasting process just from from expelling moisture from the bean, and
Yes.
that's after the whole process that's come from the producers. So,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's so many
This is
similarities.
the challenge that we find that we don't, as tea vendors, we don't have the luxury of sending raw tea
Yeah,
to a roastery. We
and
have to
influencing the
compact the
outcome.
prices. Exactly. We have very minimal, let's say, space to work on creativity on the
Yeah.
from when it comes to the roasting side of tea itself, or maybe the cultivar chosen, and the rest of it has to depend on the quality of people that we have on the tea estate itself. So uh, once we pick up the tea, we start producing it. There are so many things that we keep aside of. We tend to keep it, let's say, away from the consumers because some of them do are most of them are not ready to understand this. That there, if we say some of the oolongs or majority of oolongs that we provide or generally provide in the market, if it's, let's say, mid oxidized or heavy oxidized, you are not picking this year's tea. You're not drinking this year's tea. You probably drinking a year or 2 year old tea because of the roasting process of such teas require that we have to expose the tea to the roasting process and we have to let it rest for a couple of months and start it again and start it again.
Wow.
So there are some teas that you receive that would be been picked in 2020 and you're consuming it today after a whole year of process and a whole year of resting. I'll say there's a concept of the degassing process
Mm-hmm.
in coffee that would take a few weeks. There are in tea it could take well up to a year.
Wowzers.
Yes,
Okay.
there are so many things that I think the people are not ready to accept. There are other teas that are, I say, green teas that are picked in March, late March, early April, and we're getting them on late May or June or July at the farthest. And depends on how far you are from the queue. I might get my teas in November. So it depends on how we wait for them to actually assign each tea process packed and dispatched to the others. There are so many elements that we tend to keep the customer and the person outside of it because it's so confusing sometimes.
We have the same problem in coffee.
So, but
Which
But in general, that we lose a lot. We lose a lot from picking to packing.
You have set us up for the next episode perfectly, because in the next episode, we're going to talk about how tea is traded. So
great.
You just set it up perfectly. Thanks,
Awesome.
Ahmed, and we'll see you in the next episode, everyone. Peace, love, and peanut butter. Have an amazing rest of your day. Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.